My name is Ariana Ward, and I'm 31 years old. Before I tell you what happened, before I pull you into the night that split my life in two, before and after, let me ask you something. Have you ever been around an autistic child and felt that strange, aching contradiction? Like the world calls them limited, but there's something in their eyes that feels deeper than most people ever dare to be. Sometimes we label what we don't understand as broken, when it's really just a different kind of brilliance, waiting for someone patient enough to see it. If you've ever had a moment like that, leave a comment. I read them. I mean it. Because 10 years ago, on a freezing December night in Cleveland, I didn't just meet autism. I met abandonment, and it came wearing my sister's handwriting. That night, I came home from a 12-hour shift on a construction site. My whole body felt like it had been filled with wet cement. My fingers were stiff from the cold, my knees ached, and my hair smelled like dust and metal and exhaustion. All I wanted was a cheap dinner and the kind of sleep you fall into, like a grave. But life doesn't ask permission. Life doesn't knock. It just shows up and changes the locks from the inside. When I pushed open the door to my crummy apartment, the hallway light flickered above me like it was struggling to stay alive. And then I heard it. A sound, soft, broken, almost animal. A whimper. It wasn't coming from inside my apartment. It was coming from the dark hallway outside. The narrow space that always smelled like old carpet and someone else's cigarette smoke. My heart sped up, not from fear exactly, more like that instinct your body has when something is wrong, and you don't know what kind of wrong yet. I took a few steps forward, and that's when I saw him. A small child huddled against the wall beside an old backpack. He was rocking back and forth, not like a kid playing, not like boredom, like he was keeping time with a rhythm only he could hear. The dim light cut across his face, and it took me a second to recognize him, because I'd only met him a few times. Because my sister never liked anyone getting too close. Because she always acted like her life was too busy and too complicated for family dinners and birthday parties. But that little face, that was Marcus, my nephew, and he was only 6. I stepped closer and whispered, "Marcus?" He didn't look up. He didn't answer. He didn't even flinch like most kids would when an adult says their name. It was like he was already somewhere else, inside himself, where no one could reach him. Then my eyes caught it. A piece of paper on the floor beside him, folded once, like it had been dropped in a hurry. My throat tightened. My hand started shaking as I picked it up. And the moment I saw the handwriting, my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. Emma, my sister. The note was short, no greeting, no apology, no explanation that made sense. Just words, cold, blunt, final. Ariana, he's autistic. Diagnosed since he was 3. I've tried for 3 years. Nobody can stand him. I need a real life. I read it twice, 3 times. Each time it hurt worse, like the words were sharpening every time they entered my brain. Nobody can stand him. Not I'm overwhelmed. Not I'm scared. Not I don't know what to do. No. She wrote it like Marcus was a broken appliance she couldn't return. Like he was a stain on her dream life. And then my eyes landed on that last line again. I need a real life. As if this child, this little boy shivering in a hallway, wasn't real enough to count. I inhaled, but it didn't feel like air reached my lungs. I looked down at Marcus. He was still rocking, still silent, still not crying the way most abandoned children would cry. And that terrified me more than anything. Because it meant maybe this wasn't the first time he'd been left alone. I crouched slowly, careful, gentle. I held my hand out, not touching him, just offering it in the space between us. "Hey," I whispered. "It's okay, I'm here." Marcus flinched anyway. Not dramatically, just a small jerk of his shoulder, like my voice had hit him physically. His fingers tightened around a worn-out teddy bear I hadn't even noticed at first. The bear had one missing eye. And suddenly I couldn't stop thinking, how long has he been clutching that thing like a lifeline? I swallowed hard and stood up. "Okay," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "We're going inside." I opened my apartment door, keeping my movements slow, like I was trying not to startle a wounded animal. Marcus didn't move until I stepped back and gave him space. Then, like he was running on some internal rule book, he picked up his backpack and followed. No eye contact, no words, just quiet obedience that didn't feel like trust. It felt like surrender. The second Marcus stepped into my apartment, I grabbed my phone and called Emma. Once, twice, 5 times, 10, straight to voicemail. Then, blocked. I tried texting. Message failed. I tried Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn because desperation makes you do humiliating things. Nothing. My sister didn't just abandon her child. She erased herself. I sat Marcus down on the old couch and opened his backpack. And my chest started caving in piece by piece. Inside were a few old clothes, a thin jacket that wasn't warm enough for Cleveland winter, a crumpled autism diagnosis paper, and that teddy bear with one eye. That was it. That was everything my sister thought her son deserved. I turned toward Marcus with a forced smile that probably looked like pain. "Are you hungry?" I asked. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know the rules of his world yet. I made him a simple dinner: eggs, toast, something safe. But Marcus didn't touch it. When I turned on the bright ceiling light so I could see better, Marcus instantly curled inward like he was being attacked. His hands shot up to cover his ears. A strange sound came from his throat, half moan, half cry, like a broken instrument trying to play. I froze. My whole body went cold. Because in that moment, standing in my tiny apartment with a child I didn't know how to care for, I realized something awful. Love wasn't enough. Not if I didn't learn how to love him in the way he could feel. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my old torn couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to Marcus's soft noises from the dark corner of the room. His rocking never fully stopped. It was like the only way he could stay upright inside his own skin. I kept checking my phone. No messages. No calls. No, I'm sorry. Nothing. And somewhere around 3 a.m., when the apartment was so quiet I could hear the pipes groaning, I thought about calling the police. I thought about social services. I thought about how easy it would be to hand the problem over to professionals. And then I looked over at Marcus, small, silent, clutching his bear like it was the last proof he existed. And something inside me snapped. Not anger, not pity, a decision. I can't be the second person who abandons him. 2 days later, with sleep deprivation burning behind my eyes, I took Marcus on the bus across town. The bus stopped at the last station, and I stepped off into the cold with my nephew in my arms. I stared up at a familiar 2-story house. My parents' house. The same place I'd run away from years ago, after being told I was never good enough. 4 years earlier, at a Christmas party, they'd looked down on my job and called me unworthy. Like being a woman who worked construction made me lesser. Like sweat was something to be ashamed of. For 4 years, I tried to forget that humiliation. But desperation has a way of dragging you back to the doors you swore you'd never knock on again. I rang the doorbell twice. Time slowed. The seconds stretched like punishment. And then the door opened. My mother, Linda, stood there. Her eyes dropped to Marcus and didn't soften. Not even a little. She stared at him the way people stare at something unpleasant they want removed. Then she said, flat and cold, "So, Emma finally threw him away." I felt my throat close. The words were identical to the note. The same cruelty, different mouth. I stepped inside. My father, Robert, sat in his leather chair, eyes glued to the TV like nothing in the world mattered. He didn't stand. He didn't ask who Marcus was because he already knew. He just glanced over his shoulder and said, dry as dust, "Thought you'd never come back." I stood there holding Marcus, feeling like I'd walked into a house full of strangers wearing my parents' faces. I tried to stay calm. I explained, shaking, stumbling over words, that Emma was gone, that Marcus needed help, that I just needed support until I could find her. Linda laughed. Not a warm laugh. A laugh like a door slamming shut. "We already raised 2 kids," she said, "and we let you take care of yourselves. No more responsibilities." I stared at her. "Mom, he's your grandson." Her eyes didn't change. Robert turned the TV volume up so loud the sound scraped the room. Marcus reacted instantly. His body rocked harder, faster, the moaning sound rising like panic. And my father finally stood, only to lean forward and hiss at me like I was the problem. "Shut him up, or take him outside." I pulled Marcus closer, shielding him with my arms like my body could block their cruelty. But inside, an old pain woke up, my own childhood pain. The feeling of being treated like a burden for having needs. Linda's voice cut through again. "She called last week," she said, like she was discussing grocery shopping. "Said she got a new job in California. Guess she finally dropped that burden." Burden. Burden. They said it like it was a reasonable word for a child. I forced myself to ask, "Do you know where she is? An address? A number?" Linda shrugged. Robert shrugged too, then spoke like he was offering helpful advice. "You should give him to private adoption services. They pay money. You need money more than you need trouble." Something flared up in me, hot and violent. I shook my head, voice trembling. "No," I said, "I won't sell my nephew." Linda's expression tightened like I'd offended her. "Then don't come here complaining," she snapped. "When you turned 18, we made it clear. You're alone." Alone. That word followed me out of the house like a curse. Marcus didn't cry. He didn't protest. He just clutched his teddy bear and walked beside me like rejection was as normal as breathing. On the way home, the cold wind hit my face, and I finally understood something that made me feel sick. Emma didn't become cruel in a vacuum. She learned it here. From them. And the thought that scared me most wasn't my parents' coldness. It was the fear that some part of that coldness lived inside me too. That maybe one day, when I was tired enough, broke enough, overwhelmed enough, I might turn into them. I looked down at Marcus, at his silent mouth, his tense shoulders, his tiny hands gripping that one-eyed bear, and I made myself a promise I didn't know I was strong enough to keep. If the whole world treats you like a burden, I'll spend my life proving you were never one. But even as I promised it, a darker question whispered underneath. What if love isn't enough, and I fail him anyway? The first time I truly understood what it meant to be alone wasn't when my sister vanished. It wasn't even when my parents looked at Marcus like trash that had been dragged back into their living room. It was the next morning, when the sun came up like nothing had happened, and I realized the world expected me to keep moving like I hadn't just become someone's entire universe overnight. Marcus sat on the floor near the corner of my apartment, rocking softly, the teddy bear tucked under his chin like it was holding him together. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of cheap coffee that tasted like burnt regret, staring at my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Emma's silence wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I thought about calling the police. I thought about going into social services and handing Marcus over to people with training, policies, and tidy offices with calm voices. But then I pictured him in a strange room, surrounded by strangers who wouldn't know that bright lights hurt him, that sudden touch could feel like being attacked, that his silence wasn't disobedience, it was survival. And I couldn't do it. Not because I was brave, because I was terrified of becoming the second person who let him go. So I did the thing I'd been avoiding since childhood. I asked for help from people who weren't blood. A woman named Sally lived next door, an older lady with soft eyes and a voice that always sounded like she'd forgiven the world for being cruel. She knocked on my door that evening, hesitant. I heard crying, she said gently, or sounds. Are you okay, Ariana? I didn't plan to tell her anything. I didn't plan to let anyone see me cracking apart. But exhaustion makes you honest. I opened the door wider and whispered, My sister left her son here. He's autistic. I don't know what I'm doing. Sally's eyes didn't fill with judgment. They filled with recognition. My grandson is autistic too, she said. He's 15 now. That sentence didn't solve anything, but it gave me something I hadn't had in days. A breath. She stepped inside slowly, not moving too fast, not talking too loud, like she already understood Marcus's world had rules I didn't know yet. Kids like him need routine, Sally said. They need stability, and sometimes they only eat certain textures or colors. Sometimes it's not stubbornness, it's their body saying no. I nodded, swallowing hard, because I'd screamed at Marcus in my head a dozen times already. Just eat, just talk, just tell me what you need. Like my panic was his responsibility. Sally wrote a few things down for me. Local clinics, a support group, a number for social services that didn't sound like a threat. Before she left, she looked straight at me. You don't have to do this perfectly, she said. You just have to do it consistently. That night, Marcus stood near the couch while I pretended to sleep. I felt his eyes on me in the darkness. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He just watched, like he was trying to memorize whether I would still be there when the morning came. And when I opened my eyes slightly, I saw him retreat back to his corner. That was the moment I made the decision that changed everything. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and permanent. If no one else is coming, then I'm the one who stays. The next day, I took Marcus to the social services office. The building itself felt like a warning. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, people sitting in rows clutching folders like they were trying to prove they deserved to exist. Marcus rocked beside me in the waiting area, his fingers tapping lightly against his teddy bear. I kept whispering, It's okay, we're okay. But my hands were sweating, because I knew what the system saw when they looked at me. A single woman, a construction worker, no husband, no stability on paper, no soft, respectable job title. I was a risk, a case waiting to fail. When they finally called us in, the social worker, Ms. Thompson, didn't smile. She flipped through Marcus's diagnosis paper like she was reading a repair manual. Then she looked at me, my dusty boots, my rough hands, my hair pulled back so tightly it felt like I was holding myself together physically. You're not married? She asked bluntly. The question hit like a slap because it wasn't really a question. It was a verdict. I swallowed. No, but I'm his aunt. Family is here. I can't put him in the system. Ms. Thompson scribbled something, not looking up. Ms. Ward, she said, her voice cool. We typically prioritize autistic children being placed with families experienced with special needs. I leaned forward. Then teach me. I'll learn. I'll do whatever you say. Her pen paused. Then she added, almost casually, Do you know the failure rates for single caregivers raising children with special needs? Failure rates. Like Marcus was a statistic. Like love could be graphed. My jaw tightened. He's not a number. Ms. Thompson didn't react. Then the fluorescent light above us flickered. Just once. But it made a sharp clicking sound. Marcus's whole body locked. And then he screamed. It wasn't a tantrum. It was pain. His hands flew to his ears. His rocking turned frantic. The sounds coming from his throat turned raw and desperate, like he was being crushed from the inside. Ms. Thompson's eyes moved to me like she was saying, "See?" My heart jumped into my throat, but I forced my body to slow. I stood up carefully, knelt in front of Marcus, not touching him. "The lights are hurting you," I whispered. "Okay, we're going outside." I stepped back, giving him space, and motioned toward the hallway. Marcus's scream stuttered. His eyes darted. Then he stood, slowly, shakily, and followed me. Out in the hallway, away from the flicker, he calmed little by little, his breath turning from jagged to quiet. When we returned, Ms. Thompson looked different. Not warm, but less certain. "All right," she said, gathering her papers. "I'll review your file, but understand, there will be surprise home inspections. We need to ensure Marcus is safe." I nodded so fast my neck ached. "Of course." Then she added, like she'd been saving it for last. "One more thing. Your one-bedroom apartment doesn't meet standards. Marcus needs his own space to develop. You need a two-bedroom." The words dropped into my lap like a brick. I stared at her. I can barely afford what I have." Ms. Thompson's expression didn't change. "That's not the system's problem," her tone implied, even if her words didn't. Leaving the office, I felt like I'd walked into a fight and discovered I was unarmed. I pulled Marcus outside into the cold air, and that's when I noticed him. A man in a security uniform standing near the entrance. Gray hair, tired eyes, but something kind in his face. He gave me a small smile, not pity, not judgment. Understanding, like he'd once stood where I was standing. I nodded back and kept walking, not knowing his name. Not knowing he would end up being the first person who truly helped us survive. The next week was hell. I tried everything. I brought Marcus to the construction site one morning, sat him in the temporary office with snacks and his teddy bear. Less than an hour later, the supervisor stormed in. "What is this?" he snapped, staring at Marcus like he was a liability ready to explode. "You can't have a child here. Safety violation. I'll call the police." My stomach dropped. "I don't have anyone to watch him," I pleaded. He didn't care. "Then figure it out. This is a site, not a daycare." I went home that day with my job hanging by a thread. And then social services called. Ms. Thompson's voice was cool again. "Your parents contacted our office," she said. "They're concerned you can't care for Marcus. They requested intervention." I nearly dropped the phone. My parents. The same people who refused him? Now they were trying to take him from me, just to prove they were right about me. My hands shook with rage so sharp it tasted metallic. Thompson continued, "We need proof of stable housing and a formal, temporary guardianship filing immediately." As if my life wasn't already on fire. So I did the only thing left. I borrowed money. I took out a high-interest loan that felt like signing my future away. $2,000 at 18% interest. The number haunted me before it even came due. 2 weeks later, I stood in the middle of a crumbling two-bedroom apartment in Oakwood Heights. Water stains crawled across the ceiling like bruises. Wallpaper peeled on the corners like the place was shedding skin. The air smelled damp, old, and tired. I looked at the empty room and thought, is this stability? Or is this just poverty with an extra bedroom? I was hauling boxes up the creaky stairs when I heard a voice behind me. "Need a hand?" I turned. It was the same man from the social services office, the security guard. Up close, he looked around 60, with a face that carried both kindness and the weight of years. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. "I'm Frank," he said. "I live upstairs. I work security at a few buildings. Saw you at the office the other day." Before I could answer, he lifted the box like it was nothing. And then Marcus stepped out of the car. I held my breath, because Marcus usually recoiled from strangers. But he didn't this time. He stared at Frank, still curious, like he was studying him the way he studied patterns. Frank didn't rush him. Frank didn't speak too loud. Frank knelt slowly, without forcing eye contact, and said gently, "Hi, Marcus." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't speak. But he didn't retreat either. And in our world, that was a miracle. Frank helped me carry boxes, then gestured toward his apartment. "Come up," he offered. "I've got something that might help you." I hesitated, embarrassment rising in my throat. But I followed. The moment I stepped into Frank's place, I froze. The lighting was warm and soft, no harsh fluorescence. The walls were light beige, calm, soothing. No clutter, everything neat, predictable. It felt like breathing. Frank noticed my expression. My son is autistic, he said simply. He's 30 now, lives independently in Oregon. But when he was little, I had to learn how to build a space that didn't hurt him. Marcus walked into Frank's living room and, without being told, sat down on the couch. Calm. For the first time in days, I saw his shoulders loosen slightly. Frank reached to a shelf and pulled out a book. He placed it in my hands like it was sacred. The Reason I Jump. Read it, he said. It changed how I saw my kid. Most people try to fix autistic children, but that's the wrong instinct. He sat across from me, voice gentle but firm. The most important thing you can learn, Ariana, is not to force Marcus to fit the world. He leaned forward. Create a world where he can live. Those words hit me harder than anything my parents had ever said, because they weren't cruel. They were an invitation, a way forward. I felt tears sting my eyes, and I hated myself for it. Frank patted my shoulder lightly. I'll help with what I know, he said, but you'll need professional support too. Don't try to be a hero alone. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. And when we left his apartment, Marcus followed me quietly, teddy bear under his arm. But something had shifted. Not in the world. In me. Because for the first time since Emma's note, I wasn't just holding on to Marcus out of fear. I was holding on to him with purpose. The next day, I stood outside Oakwood Elementary, clutching Marcus's enrollment papers so tightly they wrinkled. My construction jacket was still stained. My bank account was still bleeding. My parents were still against me. And the system still didn't believe in me. But I looked down at Marcus and I whispered the only truth I had left. We're going in. And I had no idea the next room would be where the world first saw what my nephew was hiding in plain sight. Oakwood Elementary smelled like floor cleaner and fresh paper, clean in a way that made me feel dirty by comparison. I stood in the hallway, gripping Marcus's enrollment folder, painfully aware of the dried mortar on my construction jacket and the way my boots echoed too loudly against the polished floor. Every step felt like an announcement. She doesn't belong here. Marcus walked beside me, shoulders slightly hunched, teddy bear tucked under his arm like a passport to safety. We were led into the principal's office. Principal Walsh sat behind her desk, perfectly composed, glasses perched low on her nose as she skimmed through Marcus's papers. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. Her face stayed neutral, the most dangerous expression of all. The special education program is currently overloaded, she said, not looking up. And given that your guardianship is temporary, she paused. Mike, I'd strongly recommend a specialized facility instead. I knew what she meant. Take him somewhere else, somewhere he won't inconvenience us. I want him here, I said quietly. He deserves a chance. She finally looked up. Her eyes flicked from my face to my clothes to my hands. Children like Marcus require stability and expertise, she said carefully, not just good intentions. The words landed heavy. Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. A woman stepped in, mid-30s, kind eyes, soft voice. This is Ms. Perez, Principal Walsh said, our special education teacher. Ms. Perez smiled at Marcus, not the strained smile people use when they're uncomfortable, but a genuine one. Would it be okay if I spent a few minutes with Marcus, she asked me. I nodded, heart pounding. She led Marcus down the hall to the music room. I sat frozen in the principal's office, staring at a framed poster about inclusive learning environments that felt painfully ironic. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, the door opened. Principal Walsh stood up. When we reached the music room, I stopped in the doorway. Marcus stood in front of a small upright piano. His fingers hovered over the keys, not hesitant, not excited, focused. Ms. Perez played a few simple notes. Marcus repeated them. Perfectly. She tried something more complex. Again, perfect. Her breath caught. She stepped back, eyes wide, like she'd just witnessed something sacred. Have you noticed his response to music? She asked me quietly. I shook my head, stunned. No, he doesn't really talk much. She nodded slowly. Music might be how he communicates. Principal Walsh hesitated, then sighed. We'll allow provisional enrollment, she said, under strict evaluation, monthly reviews, and you'll attend all IEP meetings. I didn't care. I would have agreed to sleep in the hallway if it meant Marcus could stay. Walking out of that school, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile. Terrifying. Alive. 6 months passed. Life didn't magically become easy, but it became predictable. Marcus followed routines like lifelines. Same seat, same schedule, same quiet corners. He didn't talk much. He didn't make friends. But every day, he went straight to the piano during free periods like it was calling him. One afternoon in June, my phone rang while I was at work. It was Ms. Perez. Ariana, can you come to school right now? My heart dropped straight through my chest. I told my supervisor I had an emergency and ran. When I burst into this music room, I saw Marcus sitting on the bench, rocking gently. Beside him stood Mr. Levine, the school's music teacher. His mouth was slightly open, like he'd just seen something impossible. "I played Moonlight Sonata today," he said slowly. "Just once, for the class." He swallowed. Marcus came up afterward and played it back. Perfectly, without sheet music. My brain refused to process the words. "He can't read music," I said automatically. "That's the thing," Mr. Levine replied. "He doesn't need to." He picked up a guitar and played a complicated jazz progression, irregular rhythms, unexpected shifts. "I composed this yesterday," he said. "He's never heard it." Marcus stood up, walked to the piano, and played it back. Not just accurately, but beautifully. He added variations, emotion, depth. The room fell silent. Ms. Perez wiped tears from her eyes. "This could be savant syndrome," she said. "A rare gift, extraordinary." I felt joy rise, and then crash under its own weight. Specialists, lessons, instruments, all things I couldn't afford. On the walk home, Marcus took my hand, something he almost never did. He looked up at me and whispered, "Piano, home?" My heart cracked open. "I'll find a way," I promised. "I swear," even though I had no idea how. That promise would cost me sleep, health, and almost everything I had. But it would also change our lives forever. When I promised Marcus I'd bring a piano home, I didn't understand what that promise would take from me. I only knew this. When he asked, his eyes weren't begging. They were trusting. And I was terrified of breaking that. So I rearranged my life into something that barely resembled a life at all. Construction from 6:15 a.m. to 3:15 p.m., home for a rushed shower and a change of clothes. Security guard shift from 5:00 p.m. to midnight. Weekends, kitchen helper at a small Italian restaurant, hands smelling like garlic and bleach. Every hour I wasn't working, I was calculating. Rent, food, bus passes, therapy discounts, loan interest. Every dollar had a destination, a piano. Frank became our quiet backbone. When I worked nights, Marcus stayed upstairs with him. Frank never tried to teach Marcus the way schools did. He just showed him, slowly, patiently, how to eat, how to brush his teeth, how to button a shirt. Things I didn't have the time or energy to teach without turning desperate. I slept 3, sometimes 4 hours a night. There were days my hands shook so badly at the construction site, I had to hide them in my pockets. Nights when I stood at my security post fighting dizziness, gulping cheap coffee like medicine. Once, I coughed up blood into a sink at work. I stared at it for a long time, then wiped it away and clocked back in. Because when I pictured Marcus sitting alone at a piano that didn't exist yet, my body didn't matter. After 18 months, I counted the money in the cardboard box under my bed for the last time. I bought an old electric piano from a man who didn't ask questions. The day I carried it into our apartment, Marcus froze in the doorway. His eyes widened. He didn't run. He didn't rock. He just stood there, silent, like someone had placed the sun in front of him. He touched the keys gently. Then he smiled. Not big, not loud, but real. From that day on, Marcus changed. He spent hours at the piano. Frank lent us an old laptop, and Marcus taught himself by watching videos once, then playing them back perfectly. Music became his language. Fast melodies when he was happy, slow, heavy chords when he was sad, a soft, simple tune when he wanted to say thank you. I didn't realize how lonely I'd been until the apartment filled with sound. 6 years passed. 6 years since Emma left him at my door. Ms. Perez encouraged us to enter the Cleveland Young Musical Talent Competition. I was terrified. Lights, crowds, noise. But we practiced, slowly. Frank helped. Ms. Perez helped. On competition day, Marcus looked impossibly small behind the grand piano. People whispered. Some smiled with pity. Then Marcus played, and the room stopped breathing. He won first place. 5,000. I cried harder than I had the night Emma disappeared. That prize paid off my loan. I quit the restaurant job. I slept more than 4 hours for the first time in years. And then came scholarships, performances, articles. Marcus was 13 when he won the Ohio State Music Competition, 15 when he composed his first concerto. When the invitation from Lincoln Center arrived, my hands shook opening the email. I stood backstage the night Marcus performed under those lights, tears streaming down my face. 10 years ago, he'd been abandoned in a hallway. Now the world was applauding him, but the applause hadn't even faded when I saw them. Emma, my parents, walking toward us like they belonged. And I knew, before a single word was spoken, they hadn't come back for love. They'd come back for money. For a moment, I couldn't move. The applause from this hall was still ringing in my ears when I saw Emma walking toward us backstage, heels clicking confidently, hair perfectly styled, lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her were my parents. Linda's posture was upright, proud, as if she were attending a family celebration she had helped create. Robert walked, with his hands behind his back, chin lifted, wearing the same expression he used whenever he believed he was about to win an argument. And between them, a man in a tailored gray suit carrying a polished leather briefcase. My stomach dropped. 10 years. 10 years of silence. And they chose this moment to remember Marcus existed. Emma spoke first, her voice syrupy, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. Ariana, it's been so long. Marcus stiffened beside me. He didn't recognize her. How could he? She stepped closer, bending slightly as if to greet him. My baby, she said softly. Marcus recoiled instantly, retreating behind my arm, rocking faster. His fingers fluttered against the side of my jacket, the way they always did when his world suddenly felt unsafe. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. What are you doing here? I asked. Emma's smile trembled, as if she were offended by the question. Before she could answer, the man in the suit stepped forward and extended a business card. Daniel Cross, he said calmly, family law attorney. I represent Ms. Emma Ward. The words hit like a slap. I also represent Mr. and Mrs. Ward, he added, nodding toward my parents. We'd like to discuss Marcus's future. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. I couldn't stop. What family? I said. The one that abandoned him? Emma's eyes filled with sudden tears, perfectly timed. I made mistakes, she said, voice shaking. But I'm his mother. I've always loved him. Ariana, you took advantage of my condition. You kidnapped my son. Kidnapped. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. Robert stepped in, voice low and firm, just like it had been when I was a child. We tried to stay involved, he said, but Ariana cut us off. My hands clenched into fists. You called him a burden, I snapped. You told me to sell him. The lawyer opened his briefcase calmly and pulled out a thick folder. Birth certificate, he said, laying it on the table. Photos showing consistent contact. Records of financial support. I flipped through them with shaking hands. Photoshopped images, fake timestamps, receipts that never existed. It was all lies, neatly printed. Cross smiled, confident. We filed for custody and financial management rights, he continued. Marcus is about to sign a significant recording contract. He needs a responsible guardian. There it was. The truth. Emma wiped her tears and looked straight at Marcus. You deserve better, she said. A real family. Marcus began tapping his fingers softly on the table, humming under his breath, disconnected notes forming a pattern only he could hear. I felt the ground give way beneath me. But then Marcus looked up at me and whispered, clearer than I'd ever heard before. I remember. Emma froze. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. We left Lincoln Center that night under threat of litigation. 3 months later, we were in court. Courtroom 5 of Cuyahoga County Family Court felt colder than any winter morning I'd ever worked through. The benches were hard. The air smelled faintly of paper and old wood. Every sound echoed, shoes scraping, a cough, the shuffle of documents, like the room itself was holding its breath. Marcus sat beside me, rocking gently, eyes fixed on the floor. Anyone watching would have assumed he didn't understand what was happening. That assumption almost destroyed us. Emma sat across the aisle in a pale blue blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, hands folded like she was attending church. My parents flanked her, solemn and rehearsed. Their lawyer stood confidently, as if the outcome had already been decided. Emma testified first. Her voice cracked at all the right moments. She spoke about depression, about being overwhelmed, about how she never intended to abandon her child, only to take a break and get help. She said I had taken advantage of her vulnerability, that I had isolated Marcus, that I had manipulated the system. I sat there, nails digging into my palms, forcing myself not to speak. My parents followed. They told the judge they had always wanted to help, but I'd refused, that I was unstable, that I worked too much, that Marcus's success had gone to my head. The lies stacked neatly on top of each other. Their lawyer presented the fake photos, the forged receipts, the manufactured timeline. I felt like I was sinking into mud, slow, suffocating, inevitable. Then our lawyer stood. She presented the original note Emma had left 10 years ago, the unanswered calls, the emails, the messages sent at 3 a.m. begging for help that never came. Emma flinched, but it didn't matter. The judge leaned back, hands clasped. The court acknowledges, he said slowly, that Ms. Ariana Ward has provided devoted care for Marcus for 10 years. My heart jumped. However, he continued, Ms. Emma Ward is Marcus's biological mother. Under the law, my ears rang. Custody belongs to Ms. Emma Ward. The words slammed into me like a collapse. I couldn't breathe. 10 years. Every sacrifice. Every night I'd cried silently so Marcus wouldn't hear. Reduced to a sentence. Emma let out a shaky breath of relief. Her lawyer smiled. The judge lifted his gavel. And then, a chair scraped against the floor. I turned. Marcus was standing. The courtroom murmured. My heart nearly stopped. He stood straight, shoulders squared, eyes lifted, not unfocused, not afraid. Clear. Your Honor, Marcus said. His voice was calm, steady. I'm 16 years old. I can choose who I live with, right? The judge froze. Yes, he said carefully. At your age, the court will consider your wishes. Emma's mouth fell open. Marcus turned toward her. I do not recognize this woman as my mother, he said. The room went silent. On December 15th, 2015, Marcus continued, at 6:47 p.m., she left me at Aunt Ariana's door. I felt dizzy. She left a note that said, nobody can stand him. Emma's face drained of color. Marcus turned in slightly, eyes moving to my parents. 2 days later, Aunt Ariana took me to Grandpa Robert and Grandma Linda's house. Grandpa said, give him to private adoption services. They pay money. Grandma said, we already raised our kids. My parents collapsed back into their seats. Marcus turned back to the judge. Aunt Ariana stayed with me for 3,652 days, he said. She worked 3 jobs. She slept 3 hours a night so I could have a piano. She turned off lights so I wouldn't be scared. She sang to me. Tears streamed down my face. I choose to live with Aunt Ariana, Marcus said firmly. If you force me to leave with her, I will run away. The judge looked at Marcus for a long time. Then he nodded. The court respects Marcus Ward's decision, he said. Guardianship remains with Ms. Ariana Ward. The gavel struck. Emma screamed. I didn't hear it. Marcus took my hand. Let's go home, he said quietly. Outside the courtroom, I finally understood the truth I'd been too afraid to name for years. Marcus had always understood. He just spoke when it mattered most.